negotiations will continue this weekend.
C-SPAN 2, a public service created by America's cable television companies.
Here is a look at tonight's programming. In just a moment, a Republican presidential candidates debate from Columbia, South Carolina. Participating in the debate are Senators Phil Gramm and Richard Lugar, Lamar Alexander, Patrick Buchanan, Mauree Taylor, and Alan Keyes. After that, a discussion on the political outlook for 1996. You'll hear from new AFL-CIO political director Steve Rosenthal. Following that, Indiana Senator Richard Lugar talks to reporters at a USA Today editorial board meeting. Then a forum on affirmative action hosted by the National Gay and Lesbian Journalists Association.
Now, a Republican presidential candidates debate from Columbia, South Carolina. Participating in the debate are Senator Phil Gramm, Lamar Alexander, Patrick Buchanan, Mauree Taylor, Richard Lugar, and Alan Keyes. Due to continuing budget negotiations, Senate Majority Leader Robert Dole did not attend the debate, nor did Steve Forbes. This debate was sponsored by WIS-TV and the state newspaper.
From the South Carolina State Fairgrounds, welcome to the first Republican presidential debate of 1996. Good evening, everyone. 6 contenders join us tonight to discuss the issues. They are Ambassador Alan Keyes, Mauree Taylor, Senator Richard Lugar, Pat Buchanan, Governor Lamar Alexander, and Senator Phil Gramm. The order of questioning has been determined by a random draw, and we are going to begin. Our first question begins with Ambassador Keyes. Candidates have 1 minute to answer. Ambassador, it appears at this hour that a deal has been struck to reopen the federal government, at least temporarily. If you were participating in these ongoing negotiations, what, if anything, would you do differently?
Well, actually, I think I would have stuck with the freshman Republicans. It's so refreshing to see people who actually went to Washington. They've been there a whole year, and they still know who they're supposed to represent. The people of this country. And I've got to tell you, they probably also know their way out of Washington, which is a lot more than I can say for some folks in the leadership on the Republican side. And that's essential. You've got to know your way back to the people of this country who want to see that budget cut, who want to see the feet of the Washington establishment held to the fire, and who aren't going to give in to the unprincipled demagoguery of Bill Clinton. We're sick and tired of that kind of approach. One final point. I think it's time we also concentrated on the truth. I'm real interested in this deal. They made a deal in 1990 to balance the budget in 5 years. Here they are 5 years later saying we're supposed to be happy if they make a deal to do in 7 years what they said they'd do in 5. I think we've got to understand it's not the deal, but whether the deal gets enforced that is really going to matter.
Time up, sir. Mr. Taylor, 1 minute.
Well, number one, as Alan is correct, we all owe it to the freshmen, especially the ones that have never been politicians and that stepped up and keep their words. And I'm very proud of what they did. But I think otherwise you have to look at it. What is the problem in Washington? Washington takes approximately 40% of everyone's income, whether you're making 20 grand or you're making $1 million. So you stop and think, what happens to that money? It supports a bureaucracy. Cut the bureaucracy, folks, and you cut at the top. You don't lay off the people doing the service. Start at the 143,000 down to the 50,000. Take a third of them out. You have balanced the budget and you have a surplus. Now, who's ever talked about getting rid of the bureaucrats? That's what you have to do. You have to do it in business. I've had to do it in all my businesses. Start at the top. You don't touch it with the hourly worker. Same in the government.
Senator Lugar, 1 minute.
Well, the Republicans have already established the fact that there's going to be a balanced budget, established the fact, as the President's agreed, it's going to occur in 7 years. And with Congressional Budget Office figures. Those are the terms of the agreement that are already there. But clearly, that agreement will be reinforced if Republicans stick together in the Senate and in the House, and they come together with conservative Democrats to get 2/3 majorities that could pass a budget whether the President vetoes it or not. eventually that budget has got to come back through two houses and be signed by the president or have a two-thirds majority. So there is legislative work to be done by Republicans who have to stick together, both the freshmen as well as the senior ones. That has got to be our quest, and we will be successful.
Mr. Buchanan, you have 1 minute.
Right. Let me stand with the Republican freshmen who, as a group of political leaders, went to Washington, had the courage to do exactly what they said they would do, and are right now taking a horrendous beating from the national press and everyone else. They've done a tremendous job, and they deserve our support. But they also deserve, let me tell you something, they deserve better leadership than they're getting, especially in the senior body. Why is it that Bill Clinton can be more resolute in standing up and defending great society liberalism than some of our folks have been in defending the contract with America? I think there's one lesson to come out of this budget battle, and it's a serious one for our party. Bill Clinton's a capable, consummate politician. He is, as Alan said, a demagogue on the issues. But my friends, if you want to defeat Bill Clinton, you better not go with a career politician. You better go with someone who can put that fella in the crossfire and send him and Miss Hillary right back to Arkansas to face the music.
Governor Alexander, you have 1 minute, sir. Governor Alexander.
Well, as I heard the question, it was about what would you do differently if you were in the budget discussions, and here's what I would do. I would sign the Republican bill. I'm not running for Congress, I'm running for president. That would end it. That would settle it. I don't see why we're spending so much time giving merit badges to the president or anybody else for balancing the budget. Of course it should be balanced. So far as I know, I'm the only one running for president who's ever balanced a budget, 8 of them. And I reduced the debt in our state government. But we need to get the debate outside Washington, D.C. So for those of you who might be a little worried that Senator Dole might not be the best first president of the next century, or that he might not be able to defeat Bill Clinton, I'm here tonight to say with respect to him that I'm going to offer you a real choice. Someone who has balanced budgets, but who will take the debate outside of Washington, D.C. and lead us into the next century, expecting less from Washington and more from ourselves.
Time up, Governor. Thank you. Senator Graham, 1 minute.
Thank you, David. I'm the only one here who has stood with the freshman Republicans. When we ran in 1994, we promised the American people we would balance the budget, that we would cut taxes. We didn't say we would do it if it was easy. We didn't say we'd do it if it was popular. We didn't say we'd do it if Bill Clinton stood with us. We said we would do it, and now is the time to stand up for the principles that we believe in. I am not going to cut a deal with Bill Clinton to spend tens of billions of dollars we don't have on programs that we can't need. If we don't stand up for what we believe in, if we don't deliver on our campaign promises, how are we different than Bill Clinton? I want to draw a bright line of distinction between myself and Bill Clinton. Bob Dole said it doesn't matter that he's not here tonight. Maybe it doesn't, but it does matter that he's in Washington cutting a deal with Bill Clinton, and I'm not going to do that.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to take a question from our audience now. The question comes from Thomas Simmons of Johns Island, South Carolina. Mr. Simmons.
Gentlemen, what is the one aspect of President Clinton's performance that you find not subject to criticism?
We begin with Maury Taylor. You have 1 minute.
His golf game. I'm the only candidate up here who's got a lower handicap than him, and so I don't find fault with his golf game. I think personally he's be a charming dinner guest, to tell you the truth. I believe the whole thing that's wrong with politics today in this country is that a lot of people that are in business have stayed out of it. We just send our money and stay away from it. But it's time, it's messed up. It's either you're going to get a talkers or you're going to have a doer. And on this stage, there's only one person that's been a doer. And a doer from starting from the bottom and going and building the world's largest wheel manufacturer from scratch. And I've seen what happens to my employees as well as all across this country. We got to stop talking. You got to go in, you got to have action, you got to start it at the top, and the president is the one who manages. And that's what we're lacking in this country.
Senator Lugar.
President Clinton noted that the American people wanted change in 1992, and he tried to play upon their anxieties and their fears that the next generation would not do as well as the current one. that wages were flat, that American incomes were not moving anywhere, that there was great anxiety about employment. He preyed upon those fears, he called for change, and he said his economic program would make change. That was the strength, at least, that he brought, we thought, to the American people. But in fact, the current economy is one of low growth. The average American is losing ground. American families have not gained income. As a matter of fact, there is no emphasis in the Clinton administration on growth. Quite to the contrary, it's back to the partisan politics of redistribution. For those reasons, the president must be defeated. We're on accord on that
Time
tonight.
up, Senator. Thank you, sir. Mr. Buchanan, anything that President Clinton has done that you find not subject to criticism?
Yeah, I think the president means well for his country. I think he wants to do best by his country. But I'll tell you this, his problem is Bill Clinton hadn't got any core convictions. He does not have any core beliefs that guide him and sustain him the way they sustained Ronald Reagan. As a friend of mine said, you know, he just jumps on one policy and then on another. He's like a blind dog in a meat market. And I don't think that's the kind of leadership this country can take into the 21st century, my friends. I think we need a leadership of direction and courage, a new foreign policy that keeps us the strongest nation in the world, but keeps us out of foolish backwater civil wars like what is going on in Bosnia today. And I think we need a trade policy that stops exporting the jobs of working Americans, textile workers overseas. And we need a leader who's going to restore the God-fearing constitutional republic our founding fathers gave to us.
Governor Alexander.
That was a pretty good one about the meat market, Pat. President Clinton's strength is his persuasiveness. He missed his calling. He should have been a legislator. He would walk into a room, he would sense a consensus, and he could busily go to work persuading everybody he was right. But that's not what a president does. A president is an agenda setter, sees our most urgent needs, develops a strategy to reach those needs, and then persuades half of us that he's right. President Clinton zigs and he zags. He gets up on both sides of the bed every morning. He's the only president we've ever had who feels it necessary to work out his midlife crisis in public. And at a time when our greatest problem is teaching our children the difference between right and wrong, we have exactly the wrong man in the White House as the President of the United States of America.
Senator Graham, anything you find President Clinton is not subject to criticism about?
Well, David, I think the president has made great promises. In 1992, he said he would balance the budget, he would cut taxes for working Americans, he would change welfare as we know it. Those were great promises. We made the same ones in 1994. The problem is, when we passed the bill to do it, he vetoed it. So we know nothing Bill Clinton says is true. The question is what we say true, which is why we've got to stand on principle in Washington, D.C., and why today is not the day to begin to shift and to move and to bob and to weave. Bill Clinton is one of the few people I know that can get on three sides of a two-sided issue. And if we're going to beat Bill Clinton, we're not going to beat him with a person who can get on two sides of a three-sided issue. We're going to have a person who can and will stand on principle and who has a record to prove it.
Ambassador Keyes, you have 1 minute.
You know, in all seriousness, the one part of his record that he's still doing pretty well at is that I think he still knows how to snooker Republican leaders who have more courage of his convictions than their own, and he's doing pretty well at that. And I think it's time we really looked at the record here. This was a guy who was politically moribund in 1994. And now we have a leadership whose initials are Bob Dole that has managed to change the last hurrah of Bill Clinton into Night of the Living Dead. And this president, who is walking wounded, should have been gone out of here in any political consideration, has been revived by a Republican leadership, doesn't have the guts to stand for what we really believe in. And that is the problem. So we have a president. We have a president. We better look at it, too. This guy is good enough to beat a Republican who doesn't know what he believes in, doesn't have principles, and retreats from every stand he's ever taken. And we better nominate somebody else.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'll tell you, if this doesn't work out for you, I think some of you gentlemen may have a career in stand-up. We're going to now take questions from the candidates for each other. I will read the question, and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. The first question is from Pat Buchanan for Senator Lugar. Why should the United States continue to spend $12 to $13 billion every year on foreign aid when we're cutting Medicare benefits for our elderly?
Let me just say that foreign aid has been declining in terms of our budget. The amounts of money should never be more than we need for national security. But we ought to take a very hard look at our national security and note that one thing we found was very important was peace in the Middle East. That's $5 billion of the foreign aid for Israel, for Egypt, for the pursuit of peace in the Middle East. We have found it useful in the past to have base rights agreements, likewise to make certain that military supplies flow to those who would fight for us well ahead of this country rather than back here. We ought to use foreign aid especially to make certain we disarm the former Soviet Union, and we're doing a good job of that. That is worth every dollar of foreign aid. It's got to be an extension of our defense and our security. I think it is a very important extension. We ought to examine each dollar carefully every year.
Time up, Senator. Thank you, sir. This question from Governor Alexander for Pat Buchanan. As president, what kind of country do you want to have in the future as we enter the 21st century?
Lamar, that's not up to Crossfire standards as a question.
But it's the question I ask every candidate.
No, I'm just kidding. I'll tell you, what I want, Lamar, is I would like, as President of the United States, to hand down to the children of this generation a country as great and good as the ones our parents handed down to us. That's what we want to hand down to the children of this generation. And let me tell you something. We can do that. We can do that, my friends. Look what our parents' generation did. They fought World War II on both sides of the world and defeated fascism on both sides. They brought us through the Depression without resorting to communism or fascism. They led us into the Cold War and led us toward victory. Now, if they can do that, then I don't see any cause to be downhearted or to despair among Republicans or conservatives. Because they can do that, my friends, we can take back this country and hand it down to the next generation as great and glorious as it's always been.
This next question comes from Senator Phil Gramm for Governor Alexander. My commitment to the American people is to balance the federal budget in 4 years or not run for re-election. I'm the only candidate to make that pledge. Won't you join me tonight in making that pledge too, or tell us why not?
Thank you, Phil, for the invitation. The answer is no, I won't, because I've found in running for public office not to make promises. What I do is try to tell people where I'm coming from and what I've done. Now, what I've done as the chief executive of the state is to balance a budget already. I don't believe anybody else here, maybe Dick Lugar when he was mayor, balanced a budget. No one else here has ever balanced a budget. I actually reduced our state's debt. We earned a AAA bond rating. We were the best managed state. We had the 5th lowest taxes. So I would ask the people to look at me, someone who's had an experience as a chief executive, a governor, a university president, who's helped to start a business with 1,200 employees, and I would ask you, which one of us who gives you a commitment that he will stop the train if the budget's not balanced, but won't make you a promise, which one of us is more likely to get it done? I believe I'm more likely to get it done, but I found it best to tell people where I'm coming from and not to make promises to them.
Next question is from Ambassador Keyes to Senator Gramm. Do you favor overturning Roe versus Wade?
I do not believe that Roe versus Wade is in the fabric of the Constitution. I believe the ruling is wrong, and I am in favor of overturning Roe versus Wade. I believe that there is a consensus in our party, though there are differences on abortion, Alan. There is a consensus. We ought to stop taxpayer funding of abortion. We ought to stop funding groups that advocate abortion. In fact, we ought to stop funding groups that advocate anything. Let them advocate at their own expense. And we need a president who will appoint federal judges who believe it is their solemn obligation to interpret the Constitution and not make it up as they go along. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. What Lamar didn't tell you is that he had no choice except to balance the budget. I commit to balance the budget, and I am going to get the job done, or I'm not going to run for re-election.
Thank you, sir. Next question from Maury Taylor to Ambassador Keyes. Please describe your professional background and how it qualifies you to occupy the highest office in the land.
Well, my professional background was to spend many years as part of the federal government doing foreign policy and other work, president of Citizens Against Government Waste, organizing people around this country against higher taxes and overregulation and government wasteful spending that lit the coals that a lot of people in Washington are dancing on. But most importantly of all, my qualification is the heart to understand that this nation's #1 problem right now is the disintegration of our marriage-based two-family system and the fact that we have turned away from this country's basic principles, which define our rights and freedoms not in terms of our self-indulgence, but in terms of our respect for the authority of God from which those unalienable rights come. And I believe that those principles have got to be restored, and we've got to have leadership willing to stand up and confront the issues, including issues like abortion, that violate those principles down to the ground and are destroying the heart we need for family life.
And our final question for this segment from Senator Lugar to Maury Taylor. Presidential nominees and the president himself must be the focal point of uniting people. What would you do as the Republican nominee to unite the party, and what would you do as president to unite the country?
Well, I think the first thing is that I'd be the only one that came up from the business side, the only one that has started building a budget to balance it, which I have done. And I also am the only one up here that's ever created jobs, thousands and thousands of good manufacturing jobs. In fact, in the state of North Carolina, down in Greenwood, I opened a plant last year. There's 100 of them down there. So the first thing I look at is, #1, I believe I'm the only candidate up here who can reach out and touch also the Democrats, the ones that are dissatisfied, from the ones from the working. Because if we do not reach out and bring in some of the Democrats and the independents, then the Republicans will not win the White House in 1996. And at the same token, I think it's time this nation, as a nation, we turn around and start saying, hey, let's cut back. I don't believe senators and the bureaucrats should have the pensions they have. I think it's totally wrong. If they want to, come on out in private industry. Service should not be a career.
Time up. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. We're going to take a break here, but we will return to our Republican presidential debate in just a moment. Stay with us. The next question will come from Lee Bandy. There's a political reporter for the state newspaper.
How you been?
It will go to... Welcome back to Columbia, South Carolina. We're going to take a question now from the state newspaper senior political reporter Lee Bandy. The candidates will have 1 minute for each answer. Mr. Bandy?
When it comes to cutting federal programs, Republicans often are perceived as harsh, mean-spirited, and cruel. Conservatives with no compassion. What could you do to alter the view that Republicans are a party that lacks a heart?
Mr. Buchanan.
Well, I'll tell you something, Lee. If you want to talk about a lack of compassion, you talk about the Great Society liberals who created that Great Society program and visited utter, total disaster with the Great Society welfare state on the cities and towns of America. And I think it is an example of compassion and courage that Republicans up in Washington, D.C. are trying to terminate that and trying to change that and send it back to the states. But let me tell you, I do disagree with some priorities of Republicans. Before we moved on Medicare, we should have canceled foreign aid. We should have canceled that $50 billion Mexican bailout. I'll tell you something else. We should have ended Goals 2000 and shut down the Department of Education. And finally, I'm sorry, Phil, but we should have cut out those multi-million-dollar congressional pensions. Pat Schroeder's getting $4 million when she goes.
Governor Alexander.
Lee, I think the question's right on point, and if we don't find a way to say to the American people that it takes a lot more courage and a lot more initiative to say that I will help you rather than I will lobby the government to help you, Bill Clinton's going to be elected, and we're going to have a Democratic Congress, and we're going to have a speaker named Gephardt. So what I would do, rather than just say, let's abolish the U.S. Department of Education, which we must, I would then say, let's have a GI Bill for kids to help poor and middle-income kids go to the best schools. I would abolish all of welfare in Washington, D.C., all of it. But I would insist that we set up in our own communities, in Columbia and Nashville, the same amount of money to help people who need help and give a tax credit to those who would like to give $500 to the homeless shelter rather than to the federal tax collector. And not only should we eliminate the capital gains tax, we should turn the bureaucratic job training programs into vouchers for the 7 or 8 million people who change jobs every year because of downsizing and world competition.
Thank you, sir. Senator Graham.
My complaint with Democrats is that for them, compassion is how you feel about the people riding in the wagon, but there's no compassion for people who are pulling the wagon. I want to change welfare because it hurts the very people we're trying to help. But I want to look at every program. I want to think of some hard-working person like my printer from Mahia named Dickie Flatt, who never gets a blue ink off the end of his fingers. I want to look at every program, think of hard-working people like him, and my compassion is, are the benefits we're getting by spending money from this program worth taking the money away from Dickie Flatt to pay for it? Let me tell you something. There are not a lot of programs that'll stand up to that test. The Federal Department of Education won't stand up to that test. The National Endowment for the Arts won't stand up to that test. And when we apply that test, we're going to have a balanced federal budget, and that's compassion for our children in the future.
Ambassador Keys, you have 1 minute.
I think that actually some of the Democrats have a point, you know, because people sometimes give the impression that you can get through life and care for yourself, and that's a lot of bunk. What infant can care for himself? What elderly person can, in fact, care for themselves when they pass their productive years? The question isn't whether people have to care for each other. It's whether or not we continue to fund a tax-funded, coercive government approach to caring for people that destroys their families, undermines their moral character, and delivers that help without any love, or whether we're going to rebuild the family structure founded on love and commitment and sacrifice and obligation that doesn't send you a check alone, but gives you that look of love in your grandchildren's eyes that tells you that your life was worth something. We need to rebuild families in this country and redefine the issue of caring as those who are heartlessly trying to pursue a bureaucratic approach to compassion and those who want to rebuild the only institution that can deliver care with love, and that institution is the family. We will rebuild it or we will perish.
Mr. Taylor, you have 1 minute, sir.
Well, coming from the business side and a non-politician or lawyer, I'll tell you this. I personally believe that both the Democrats and the Republicans could do a little bit of help in how to explain to the working men and women of this country. But number one, the Republicans have a poor PR. The first thing is we've got to start thinking about the working men and women of this country, because they're the ones who are paying the taxes. And we've got to turn around and bubble this economy up. No more talk, no more rhetoric. Stop all the giveaways. I'm the only one from business up here. Every state in this union wants to give you tax credits to move a plant. This is nuts. And our own federal government wants us to move plants offshore. We got to stop it, create the jobs. You give jobs to people, and you're not going to have the problems of welfare that we have today. There's the compassion. Give them a chance to make a good living. That's 10 to 20 bucks an hour.
Senator Lugar, 1 minute.
Republicans will make the strongest appeal to all Americans if we end income taxes, if we get rid of the Internal Revenue Service, if in fact we move to growth in this economy by taxing consumption, not our paychecks, and not our savings, and not our investment, and not our dreams. We have to have 3.5% growth in this country if we are to make secure Social Security. That is certainly a compassionate act. We have to have 3.5% growth if we're to secure Medicare. That's a very compassionate act. We have to have 3.5% growth if we are to do the infrastructure of this country, the job it needs to have in order for jobs to be created, for the dynamism to occur. That's where jobs are created. I would just say, Maury, I went through the factory business too. I've created jobs. I understand what the end of the IRS would mean. And that's why I want to see it end. Change in taxation is what we say.
Thank you very much. And we're going back to the audience now for another question. This one from Diane Dantzler from Columbia. Ms. Dantzler.
Thank you, David. According to national statistics, the majority of voters are philosophically moderate and politically independent. If you win the Republican nomination with the support of conservatives, how will your strategy change in order to gain the support of the uncommitted voters?
Governor Alexander, 1 minute.
My strategy will be the same. My strategy will be the same. What I'm trying to say to the Republican Party is that we had better wake up, because if our message is Washington and our nominee is Bob Dole, we run a risk of losing not just the presidency, but the House and the speakership. We've got to get the debate out of Washington, beyond the budget, and what appeals to Republicans will appeal to the country. We need to paint a picture of the future based upon our principles, which are a strong America, a balanced budget, freedom from Washington, and personal responsibility. I can do that. I can win a vision contest with Bill Clinton. He's dangerous because he can fake a vision, and we're about to create a contest between a president who can fake a vision and a senator who is too decent to fake one. And in that sort of contest, we will lose the independent voter.
Senator Phil Gramm, you have 1 minute, sir.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Diane. We're not going to beat Bill Clinton by being moderate. I'm not going to change my position. I have won landslide elections in Texas, which has until very recently been a Democratic state, by standing on principle. I have garnered the support of independents, conservative Democrats, blue-collar workers. I'm the only Republican in the history of my state that's gotten 50% of the Hispanic vote and over 25% of the black vote, and I did it by standing up for principle and by defining our vision for the future: free enterprise, individual liberty, and opportunity in terms that people could understand. We've got to learn from Ronald Reagan that you win by being yourself. I know who I am, and I know what I believe in, and I'm not afraid to stand up alone when I know I'm right, and the American people are looking for just such a man.
Ambassador Alan Keyes, sir.
You know, I have to make clear, I guess my campaign is not about a strategy. It's really about trying to get a clear message of priority across to the American people. Every major problem we face in this country is rooted in and related to the breakdown of the marriage-based two-parent family. Poverty, crime, miseducation, it all comes back to what's happening in the home. And as I go around the country, I am finding that across every line of race and color and creed and religion and party, Americans have awakened to the truth that we must restore our family system to its pride of place, give back control of income to families, give back control of schools to parents, or we are not going to see the restoration of family decency we need. I think it's that kind of concentration on our real problems, looking at them objectively, finding what is the top priority challenge we face today, and challenging Americans to rise and meet that challenge which they know in their hearts is the one that we have to meet, or this nation, this republic is not going to survive. And I think that's what can bring us together on the basis of those strong principles that the founders laid down in the first place that give us the self-discipline to maintain decent family life.
Mr. Taylor, 1 minute.
Well, Diane, number one, I'm not a politician. I never wanted to be a politician. I got into this thing because of my employees. They felt that no one was ever standing up to represent the working men and women of this country, and someone has to stand up for them. As you know, the polls show 70% of the American public are fed up with politicians, whether they're Democrat or Republican, because it gets down to talk. Of all the gentlemen up here, I'm the only one that took and put his own money on the table, because I'm the only one that's not using your taxpayer funds. I worked to get it, and I don't really appreciate doing it, but it's the only way you can do it with principle. I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to step up and tell you, if you want that budget balanced, you want jobs, you want a fair tax code, then I'll go do it and get the heck out of la-la land.
Senator Lugar.
My strategy will be the same all the way through this campaign as it's been really throughout my public life. I began by trying to bring about peaceful desegregation of the Indianapolis school system in 1964, the unity of city and suburbs in Indianapolis in 1969. I worked in the Senate to make certain that we saw the saving of New York City through loan guarantees and the saving of the Chrysler Corporation and the jobs that were there through loan guarantees. I worked for democracy in the Philippines against apartheid in South Africa. I've worked to try to make certain at all points that I understood the pleas of my constituents and all Americans. I've won Indiana with over 2/3 of the vote in the last 2 elections. 70% of all young voters 18 to 29, regardless of party. 34% of Afro-Americans. That came about because they believed in me. They trusted me. They knew I was a straight shooter and that I will remain.
Senator. Thank you, sir. Mr. Buchanan.
Well, everybody knows that Pat Buchanan's been a consistent conservative his whole life, and I'm going to pick a running mate and have a platform that is conservative to the core because we're going to be running against 2 liberals. That's Gore and Clinton, and we're going to have a conservative-liberal contest. But let me tell you this. We do got to reach out to those Democrats, those working people. The 300,000 that lost their jobs because of NAFTA. The workers in all those plants across this country. They're seeing their jobs go to Mexico, China, and Japan, and the real incomes of working Americans declining every single year. And I think we got to have a program to deal with that, and trade policies that put our own country and our own people first for a change. Let me tell you something else. I'm going to stand up to Bill Clinton on the social, cultural, and moral issues as well. Let him be pro-abortion all he wants. We're going to restore respect for human life back to where it belongs, and we're going to make America that God-fearing constitutional republic it was intended to be.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. And we'll have more questions and closing statements for the candidates in just a moment, so stay with us. Next. And welcome back to Columbia, South Carolina, and our Republican candidates' presidential debate. Gentlemen, we have this question for you. It may very well be a good idea to cut taxes, but it takes no leadership. It may very well be a good idea to take people off the welfare rolls, but it takes little political courage. What great sacrifice will you ask all Americans to make? Senator Graham.
Well, David, first of all, I think it takes courage to cut taxes when you have to take the money away from the federal government to do it, and that's exactly what I intend to do. I think the government is spending too much money. I don't think they spend it as well as parents would spend it. Bill Clinton wants the government to spend your money. I want you to spend your money. I know the government, I know the family, and I know the difference. And I want families to keep more of what they earn. I think it takes courage to change welfare, because there are people who say that if you want to take people off welfare, you must want to hurt them. I want to change welfare because I love them, because I think welfare is denying them access to the American dream. It's making mothers dependent. It's driving fathers out of the household, and I want them to help them get that dream back. And the way to help them get it back is to change welfare and help them re-earn their dignity and their rightful place in America. And I'm committed to do it, and I think it takes courage to do it.
Ambassador Keyes.
I guess I'm going to ask the American people to do something really hard. Over the last 30 or 40 years, we have been sold a corrupt concept of freedom in which people have been defining our rights and our freedoms in terms of self-indulgence, self-gratification, telling us that our selfish desires and agendas are the be-all and end-all of liberty, and that's all we have to care about. We have sanctioned all kinds of practices, including the abortion of innocent unborn children in the womb, on the grounds that this is our choice. And I'm going to challenge the American people to return to the principles this nation was founded on, the principles that say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That means that we don't get to decide on the humanity of other people. God decided that, and we just have to discipline ourselves to be responsible before God in our attitude toward their life and toward their dignity. That's what I will demand, and that's a tough sacrifice, because we're going to have to give up all the lies that are being told us in the movies and the television screens and the magazines that tell us that freedom is free. Well, it's not. Freedom is a responsibility, it's a discipline,
Time up,
and we're going to
Ambassador.
have to learn how to meet
Time up, sir. Mr. Taylor, you have 1 minute.
Well, I think that the biggest sacrifice I'm going to ask the American people goes out to the business community to say, listen, get your people, get all your employees involved, show them how much the government's really taking, show them how much you're paying on their behalf too. The government's taking 40%. We've got to stop. We've got to pull it back. We should only be able to take out 20% from this public. And when that happens, how are we going to do it? It's real simple, as I stated earlier. The only way you're going to do it is cut 1/3 of the bureaucrats, and you got to start them at the top. And that's 1 million people, 1 million bureaucrats. And we're going to have to find jobs for them. And then also, someone's got to turn around to the senators and the congressmen and say, listen, your pensions are too much. Cap them at $60 grand. Cap all the federal employees at 60 grand. You got them over 100,000. It's wrong, folks. And that's the sacrifices and what we're going to have to do. Start it at the government. That's where it has to start.
Time, sir. Senator Lugar.
We've often stated that freedom is not free, and that is clearly true when it comes to our national security. I think Senator Thurmond stated it well earlier this evening, that we have to have a strong national defense. We have to have a strong foreign policy. That requires sacrifice. The temptation now is to say the Cold War is over. The need to think beyond our borders simply is not there. But in fact, America ought to lead the world. We shouldn't do it all by ourselves. We ought to be the leader that brings parties to the table, that creates strong alliances for our security as well as the security of others. We ought to make certain that we corral nuclear, chemical proliferation before it plagues us. We have to make certain that our research on weapons systems stays ahead of everybody else. That requires investment, that requires sacrifice at a time that many Americans are in a status of denial on foreign policy and defense.
Mr. Buchanan, you have 1 minute.
You know, it's often been said that a man best understands the strength of a tide when he's swimming against it. And a Republican president who's a fighting conservative, he's going to have to stand up to Washington and downsize that government radically. And we've seen from the last 19 days how hard that is and how easy it is sometimes to buckle. He's going to have to stand up to the forces of secularism that dominate this popular culture. It's radio, it's TV, it's music, everything about it. We all know how the culture's been polluted, but anybody that stands up to it, I'll tell you this, he's going to face mockery. He's going to face ridicule. He's going to face hostility. He's going to be called names, and he's going to be laughed at. So I think the message that's going to go out from this place is really, take a look at each man up here. Every one of them took courage to get in this race. Choose the man you think's got the courage to stand up to the forces of the times and defeat them.
Governor Alexander, you have 1 minute on that question.
I want to lead this country into the next century and to persuade us to expect less from Washington and more from ourselves. That is a difficult and inconvenient message, but it is the truth. The most important words that the first president of the next century can say are these: we should spend less time trying to figure out what the government owes us, and less time trying to figure out who to blame for what goes wrong, and more time being willing to accept personal responsibility for the consequences of our own actions. If the children are running around the streets of Columbia or Nashville, where I live, we should go get them. If the television is trash, we should turn it off. If the babies are being born exposed to cocaine because their mothers are, in the end, that's not a Washington, D.C. problem. That's our problem, a problem of our families, our neighborhoods, our churches, and our schools. Less from Washington, more from ourselves.
Thank you, gentlemen. And now it's time for our final question from the audience. This one comes from Dr. Charlie Davis of Columbia. Dr. Davis.
Gentlemen, Chief Justice John Marshall wrote in 1819 that the power to tax involves the power to destroy. It's time for something much less destructive than the current income tax. What do you think should be done?
Ambassador Keyes, we start with you, and you have 45 seconds for this answer, gentlemen. 45 seconds.
Well, I think it's actually a very short answer. You could give it in 5. I'm an abolitionist. I think we have to abolish the income tax. We have to repeal the 16th Amendment. We have to move back to the original Constitution, which had the federal government funded from tariffs, duties, and excise taxes. And we have to restore control of family income and individual income to the people who earn it, not to the government. It's time we stopped being tax serfs and tax slaves and became a free people. And we also need to abolish that institution which has blurred the distinction between private and public things, destroyed our privacy by going into our affairs in a way that's totally unjustified and inconsistent with the status of a free people. And only abolishing the income tax will allow us to abolish the IRS.
Mr. Taylor, 45 seconds.
Well, first thing is, I agree with Steve Forbes that you should just scrap the IRS code, but I disagree with him on his flat tax, and I disagree with Senator Lugar on his national sales tax. Because you see, you get to a position as myself, whether it's consumption or flat tax, I sell $15 million of stock, capital gains, I pay $5 million. Under their plans, I would pay 0. So that's wrong, especially when someone else would have to be paying. Now, what I believe is the 2%, 10%, and a 17%. 2% up to $20,000, that's $400. Every $1,000 above it, you take out 10. Above that, 35. No deductions, no exemptions, even people on welfare. Give them the 2%, let
Time
them
up,
pay.
sir. Senator Lugar.
Of course we should abolish the income tax. Of course we should abolish the Internal Revenue Service. But Maury, you're wrong that a tax upon a capital gain is not a good idea. This whole idea of fairness is a democratic idea. Our idea should be one of growth, of opportunity. The reason I want to shift to tax on consumption is I believe everybody ought to be the judge of when they want to be taxed. I want every worker to take home a paycheck that is his, to save and invest, to pass on to his loved ones without questions, without intrusions, without audit, without the mismatch in which the Internal Revenue Service misses $127 billion. The flat tax won't make it, simply because you still have the IRS, you still have audits, you still have to estimate income. We need to make that distinction clearly.
Time up, sir. Mr. Buchanan, 45 seconds.
Well, I'm going to put a consumption tax on also, but it's going to be on Chinese communist goods coming into the United States. It's going to be on Japanese goods coming into the United States. And every dime of those tariffs will be used to cut the taxes on small business in America. And yes, I am for a flat tax, but I got one disagreement with it. You can't have trust fund babies down in Palm Beach clipping coupons and paying zero tax, as they would under Steve Forbes' tax, while working families pay 17%. So we need a flat tax that's fair to the working people of America, and then we need to put our tariffs on those countries that deny equal, fair access to America's goods to their markets. We need a trade hawk in the White House.
Governor Alexander.
Our goal should be jobs, growth, savings, and investment. Here's what I would do in my first year as president. Eliminate most deductions. Take the savings to repeal the Clinton tax increase, then repeal the 1990 tax increase, then eliminate the capital gains tax all the way, totally gone. Increase the exclusion in estate tax and increase the personal exemption for middle-income taxpayers. That would do the job. I have a little warning here. For all of you who've seen the ads about the flat tax, read the fine print. To begin with, it would take your home and reduce its value between 10 and 25% in the first year. That's not a very good way for a Republican administration to lead this country into the next century.
Senator Phil Gramm.
Charlie, everybody here has talked about how they'd collect the taxes, but nobody's talked about the most important point. If you want to let people keep what they earn, you've got to keep the government from spending it. And I'm going to put the federal government on a budget. I'm going to control spending. I want a flat tax. I want to preserve charitable deductions because I want churches and charitable organizations to do more as government does less. I want to preserve the deductibility of mortgage interest on your home because I think home ownership is an important part of the American dream. But it's not going to do us any good to have a flat tax if we don't control spending and the flat tax rate is 100%. It'll be real simple. What did you make? Send it in. I also want to be sure before we start a consumption tax that we eliminate the income tax. I want to crimp the fuel line to big government. I don't want to run a second fuel line to the corporator.
Senator. Thank you, sir. Gentlemen, we now come to our segment of the program where we have rapid answers. We'll try to get through a series of questions here. You'll have one or two sentences, and Lee Bandy has the first question. Lee.
Would you support a constitutional amendment banning all abortions?
Mr. Taylor, begin with you.
No, I believe it's a religious issue, and it's between a woman or doctor and her religion. Federal government does not belong into it. They shouldn't be paying for it, but don't change the Constitution.
That's your time, sir. Senator Lugar.
I would support a constitutional amendment to ban abortion except to save the life of the mother in case of incest and rape.
Mr. Buchanan.
Of course, I'd support a constitutional amendment because an unborn child is a creature of God and has got the same right to life as you and I.
Governor.
The answer is no. I'm pro-life. I believe states have the right to restrict abortion and should, but the federal government should stay out of it.
Senator.
It's the duty of the federal government to protect the rights of its people, and a basic right, the fundamental right, is the right to life. No one has proposed eliminating abortion when the mother's life is in danger.
Ambassador Keys.
As I said, with that understanding, consistent with the Declaration that you've got to protect the mother's unalienable right to life, I would support a human life amendment banning abortion. And I do not believe we can leave this decision up to the states any more than we can leave the human rights of people not to be enslaved up to the states. If our rights are being violated, they must be protected.
Time. Next question, gentlemen. You are president today. American soldiers start to die in Bosnia. Do you pull out, no questions asked? Senator Lugar.
No. Under no circumstances do we pull out until we make certain that our mission is completed. Our credibility is very important.
Mr. Buchanan.
Our credibility should not have been put at stake, Senator. If that army's in Bosnia when I'm president, I will pull it out and bring it home to the United States.
Governor Alexander.
The answer is no. That would be Somalia. We should not have ground troops in Bosnia, but the Republican president will have to extricate us with honor and should do it quickly.
Senator Graham.
I didn't support sending troops to Bosnia when they weren't dying there. If by January the 20th of 1997 they're still there, when I become president, when my hand comes off the Bible, I'm going to start an orderly process to bring them home.
Ambassador Keys.
I didn't support sending troops into Bosnia because we don't have a security interest there. I think they ought to be withdrawn in an expeditious and orderly way. But I don't think the decision ought to be based on whether our troops there are dying or not. I think you should make that kind of a question the top consideration before you send them in.
Mr. Taylor.
We should not be in Bosnia. I'm the only one up here that's traded internationally for 20 years. We don't belong there, and we don't belong calling up the National Guard either.
And gentlemen, one final rapid answer question. Do you support a repeal of a ban on assault weapons? Mr. Buchanan.
Look, I would have vetoed that entire crime bill, let alone the assault weapon ban. Yes, I do favor its repeal. Second Amendment rights. Second Amendment is as much a part of the Constitution as the First Amendment.
Governor Alexander.
I do not favor a ban on assault weapons. Two words that will never get guns off the streets are federal law. Two words that will are personal responsibility.
Senator Graham.
If gun control worked, the District of Columbia would be the safest spot on the planet instead of the murder capital of the world.
Ambassador Keys. Ambassador Keys.
It was a bill based on a phony definition. It's a bill based on a phony concept that you can pass laws that apply to criminals. You know, the definition of a criminal is that's somebody who doesn't obey the law.
Time, sir.
When are the gun control people going to learn that?
Mr. Taylor.
Yes, repeal it. Federal government does not belong into gun control, period.
And Senator Lugar.
I supported the assault weapons ban because I believe there is no right to spray lead in a cafeteria or a playground.
Thank you, sir. We now have our closing statements. Gentlemen, you'll have 1 minute each for your closing statement, and we begin with Governor Alexander.
I'd like to ask you to look ahead to October. Presidential debate, 40 million people watching. President Clinton gets a question. He looks at the questioner, feels the questioner's pain, gives a very good answer. If we nominate someone who starts talking about getting a bill out of a subcommittee, Clinton will be president, we'll have a Democratic Congress, Gephardt will be speaker. We need to bring ourselves to say as Republicans to Senator Dole, with respect, we appreciate your long service in the Senate, but you are not the right man to be in that debate next October with Bill Clinton. It may be Senator Dole's turn, but it is not his revolution. We need to nominate someone who can paint a picture of the future based upon Republican principles. We need to move on to a new generation of leadership. So I would remind you as you vote, if you don't mind, as your former education secretary, to remember your ABCs. Alexander beats Clinton.
Senator Graham, closing statement.
Lamar, when the president says to me in that debate, I feel your pain, I'm going to say, yes, Mr. President, and you cause it. I want less government and more freedom. I think Washington has too much to say about how your income is spent, about how your business is run, about how your children are educated, and I mean to take that power back from the federal government and give it back to your family. When I was a boy in 1950, the average family with 2 children sent 1 out of every $50 it earned to Washington. Today it's sending 1 in 4. I don't think government is spending your money as well as you could spend it, and I'm going to change that. If we don't change the deficit spending, a baby born last year will send $187,000 of taxes to Washington in their working life just to pay interest on the public debt. That's not just economic suicide, it's immoral, and so help me God, as president, I'm going to stop that from happening. I'm going to balance the budget in my first term, or I'm not going to run for re-election.
Ambassador Keyes, 1 minute.
I think it's going to be important to impress on the American people and on ourselves that we don't just have money problems, we have moral problems. And those moral problems are leading to the disintegration of the marriage-based two-parent family, and that is causing the money problems that are bankrupting the country. We have got to restore the control of income, the power, the responsibility, and the sense of self-discipline that are required in order to sustain decent family life. That has to be this nation's #1 priority. There is nothing more important than that, because every other problem we're trying to resolve is going to be continued and intensified if we don't restore the strength and integrity of the marriage-based family structure. That's the message I'll be carrying to the American people, because I think objectively it's the one we've got to face. And frankly, we need to worry less about winning and losing as candidates and worry more about whether America wins or loses. And America's not going to win if we don't address the #1 priority that is tearing this country down. Restore the family, restore the foundations for this nation's freedom in the next century. That should be our mission.
Mr. Taylor, you have 1 minute.
Well, I'm not a politician and I'm not a lawyer. And as you can recognize by these fine gentlemen, their business has always been talk. And they come from the land of talk, Washington. I come from a land out here in the middle, and even in here, South Carolina, of doing, building. We're going to have someone that goes in with a total fresh perspective, that goes in and understands that you do have to cut it. And you have to bring people into Washington to run this stuff who are not politicians. And I've seen enough bad management. I practice what I preach. I've never laid off an hourly employee. I start at the top, and you've got to cut at the top. And as you know, they haven't spoken one word what they would cut. I'm not a talker, I'm a doer. So any of you out there that want to support me, I have a nickname. It's called the Grizz. And I got that from Wall Street because of my negotiation ability. That's why I have a 1-800-USA-BEAR. You're more than welcome to call me if you want to, because it's going to take you to make the change.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Gentlemen, as we head down the home stretch of our debate, Senator Lugar, you have 1 minute.
We must strive as Republicans to have a united party that speaks the hearts, the minds, the dreams of all of the American people, a party that is broad-based, as inclusive as possible, a party that has the strength to govern and a very large mandate to do so, that strengthens our majorities in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Each one of us, as president, with those majorities, will in fact balance the budget. We will reduce the size of government. We will devolve powers back to the states. Each of us will. The basic criteria is which one of us would be best as commander-in-chief for the sense of the security and the foreign policy of this country, which one of us has the imagination to bring about 3.5% to 4% real growth of our economy, which one of us can restore the American dream that each generation should succeed beyond its forebears. That is the criteria that I stand for.
Senator, thank you. And Mr. Buchanan, your closing statement.
Senator, we got to ask another question. Which one of us is best qualified in terms of his capacity to communicate